Good morning once again, my brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ. What a great opportunity we have again today to study God's Word, and I invite you to come with me to Genesis chapter 41. Have you ever been in a situation in your life where you just could not, for the life of you, figure out what God was doing and why nothing was working out the way you had hoped it would work out? And then all of a sudden, God answers. God moves and things change. Well, this is the story of Joseph. Joseph has been in prison for a while. In fact, look at this. Remember when verse 1 of 41 came to us? Joseph's in prison for how long? For 2 years. And that's just 2 years from when the cupbearer and the baker left. Who knows how long he's really been in prison. In fact, we'll do a little math later on in this, but just notice 730 days, waking up in your cage, eating out of the bowl they give you again today, doing your best to keep the prison running as the warden has charged you with the operation of it all, but still you're in prison. Is it ever going to end? Is there any way out? Well, you remember God moves, but Joseph doesn't know that. He's still in prison, but Pharaoh has a dream, and we saw yesterday that God puts it in Pharaoh's heart to ask Joseph for the interpretation. Nobody else can give Pharaoh the interpretation. Joseph can. And once he does, look what happens. Genesis 41:41. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Really? Talk about going from the bottom to the top. Now Joseph has such favor with the most powerful man in Egypt that he is now put in charge of the whole place. God moves. Now Joseph still doesn't really understand how all this is going to play into the reunification of his family and all that, but we'll get to that as the story progresses. But this story's here, I think, to help us have encouragement that God is listening to us when we pray, that God does have a purpose for the things that happen in our lives that might not be very fun, and in fact, we might not like them at all. And yet, look at Joseph. He's persevering. God now opens a door so wide, I'm sure it's beyond anything Joseph could have ever imagined. Listen to this. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger. He put it on Joseph's finger. This is symbolically just phenomenal. All right. He dressed him in robes of fine linen. He put a gold chain around his neck. Wow. Hey, let's announce the fact that this former prisoner is now the number 2 guy in the whole country. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and men shouted before him, make way. Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Imagine you're a prisoner one day where nobody gives 2 cents about whether you live or die. And the next day or the next week, you're riding in a chariot. There's guys in front of you yelling, make way. You're being announced as the number 2 guy in Egypt. You're put in charge of the whole country. I can only imagine that Joseph's head is swimming. God, what are you doing? What happened in my life? But according to the dream, Joseph has a job to do. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift a hand or foot in all of Egypt. You have supreme power next to me. Pharaoh gave Joseph the name, here we go, Zaphanath Paneah. Now that has Egyptian meaning. It might mean a sovereign supplier. There was conjecture when I studied that about what it might mean. We're not told. But here's something else Pharaoh does for Joseph. He gives him Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On to be his wife. And Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. When it says priest of On is not a god, On is a place. Hierapolis is the current name of that place. It's in the northeast part of Egypt, a little northeast of Cairo. But okay, Joseph's second in command. He's got a new wife. Guys are riding in front of him in their chariots, pronouncing his entrance. His travel schedule has just gone berserk. He's going all over the country. Imagine the power he must understand God has when God decides to change his life. Nothing can stop it. Just like he couldn't get out of prison on his own, nothing's stopping this either. But here's a clue for us. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Now, remember, I think it's back in chapter 37, we're told that Joseph is 17 years old when he starts telling his dreams to his brothers. We're not sure how long it took his brothers to sell him into slavery from the time they started listening to his dreams, but that was certainly an irritant to them. And it wasn't probably too much longer than that. Let's say it was 18 or maybe 19. What we know now is for the last 10, 11, maybe even 12 or 13 years, Joseph has been basically considered to be an outcast. And now he's gone from the bottom to the top. He enters the service of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence. He traveled throughout Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. You remember the dream Pharaoh had? This is exactly how Joseph interpreted it, that there'd be 7 years of abundance. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. So Joseph has a plan. I believe it's a plan God gave him. He has the wisdom of the Lord. In fact, he's already been said to have the Spirit of God in him. If you recall, the leadership of Egypt has already recognized that. So in each city, he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. All right, Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain like the sand of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. So God's in control, right? And God says, look, Joseph, Pharaoh's going to have a dream. Joseph, I'm going to manipulate the circumstances of life to make sure there are 7 years of abundant harvest. Joseph, I'm going to manipulate the circumstances of life to make sure there are 7 years of famine. I'm going to put you right in the middle of it, and I'm going to work a miracle that might even be considered greater than coming out of prison to become second in power in Egypt. And we're going to get to that as the story unfolds. But we're told this, before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph. All right, by Asenath, daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. So now Joseph has a wife given to him by Pharaoh. Now he's having children. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, and he said, "It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." Just pause there for a minute. Manasseh has come. Joseph is starting his family. He has no idea that God's plan includes the reunification of his family with Jacob and his brothers. He has no idea. He thinks he's starting over. And he reminds us through naming Manasseh that he has had all kinds of trouble, years and years and years and years, and he's going to try to forget his trouble. He's going to try to forget his father's household. He's going to try to just put it behind him, move on. God's plan unfolds in a much more perfect way than even what Joseph anticipates. But what we see here is, okay, son number 1 from Joseph, Manasseh, and it's born not to a Jewish woman, but to an Egyptian woman, most likely raised in a pagan setting. So, God really isn't looking at religious background when he chooses people. He picks this lady. She has Manasseh, and Manasseh will play a role in the furtherance of God's purpose in the establishing of the promised land. The second son, he has number 2 here, Ephraim, and he said, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." Notice how the text brings us back to the idea that Joseph has been suffering. He's had pain, and he knows it. None of this has been fun, right? He's still naming kids in order to combat those feelings of pain that he's experienced for so many years. I'm going to call him Ephraim, as God has overcome my suffering. Wow, amazing. The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, just as Joseph had correctly interpreted the dream of Pharaoh. And the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands. Now that's a critical point to bring out, that it's not just Egypt that's experiencing this famine. And if you look at your Old Testament, you'll see that God moves people around through famine. All right? This is something that he uses to adjust populations to where he wants them. There was famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. Why? Because of Joseph's planning, because he had understood what God told him about how to deal with the famine. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, in other words, when they started running out of food, the people cried to Pharaoh for food, and then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph, do what he tells you." So Joseph is still sitting on these storehouses of grain. When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened the storehouses. And look at this. He sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. Now, what does a good government official do? Tax the people. Now these people need to eat. What does Joseph do? He is selling them food. What's going to happen? There's going to be a big transfer of wealth from the people of Egypt to the Pharaoh of Egypt through this event. Nonetheless, the people have food to eat, and that's really the point of the text. And we're told again that the famine was absolutely severe. In other words, nothing's growing. All the countries came to Egypt. Here we go. The door cracks open. Joseph's reunification with his family is now hinted at here. But because all the countries came to Egypt, guess what? That means Israel needs to feed its family as well. And we'll see as the story progresses that they come to Egypt as well. They come to buy grain from Joseph. Again, we're told what? Because the famine was severe in all the world. So as we go into chapter 42, we're going to see God's plan unfold. But again, there's so much to learn here. But one thing to just rest in is, even in hardship, if you belong to God, if you know Jesus Christ, even in hardship, unrelenting hardship that seems like it's never going to change, God has purpose, God has plan, and our calling is not to try to wiggle out of where we are. Our calling is to say, God, lead me through this valley. Hold on to me. Help me be faithful to you no matter what it looks like, so that you can serve your purpose. We're watching that play out in Joseph's life. I pray you serve him well today, church. God bless you.
Who is it who for sinners shed his blood, and now for cleansing all can plunge beneath that flood? It's Jesus. But do you know who he is? He's His glory, the first, the last, the future, the past. He is God.